My name's Joe Wood and welcome to All Things Design, the podcast that unpacks design and how it drives digital transformation. Today, I'm speaking with Angus Tait, Product Design Director at Xero. Angus, thanks for joining me today. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very interested to unpack today's topic, aligning design teams with business objectives. I don't know where you want to kick that off, but super interested to dig into it.
Yeah, it's a great topic to talk about. I think it's one of the challenges when you've got a team of designers who are probably going to be very focused on their users and customers, and sometimes you need to direct them towards a few other things.
Do you have like a standard starting point that you try and I don't know, you've got a new product that you're going into. So where do you kick things off? Do you just have your own process that you go, this is what we're doing, or does Xero have their own process, or does previous companies have their own process?
Yeah, I think the general principle, is that you want to build in alignment from the beginning of anything that you're working on. And you want to align on outcomes. And I think designers will naturally gravitate towards the customer outcomes. We're all customer obsessed, and that's really good. I think some of the downside to being customer obsessed is that you see every problem that could affect every user, and you might just dwell on all of them. You want to solve every problem because that's how you feel like you're doing a good job. It's not necessarily the best way for a business to operate because a business can't solve every single customer problem. So you want to look for the overlap of a customer problem and a business problem, or a business objective or outcome that you're trying to achieve. So that's something you've got to build in right from the beginning of a project. And I really like the term designing for alignment. So designing your project to build in that alignment right from the beginning. The more you can build it in, the longer it's going to last. The more that your project, in a SaaS company in particular, the more chance your project is going to see it through to the finish line, and you're going to get it through into customers' hands. That's the end goal.
Starting there, we talk about designers and them being very customer focused, which is great. But obviously at the start of any process, you've really got to work with understanding and communicating with stakeholders. Is that a big part of what you do at Xero? How easy is that for you? Xero is not the oldest organization, so I assume the maturity is probably there to understand how design works. But how much of a part of your role is working with the stakeholders to really get them to understand how you need things to be done before you actually get it through to the design team and trying to align them back to the strategy?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things there. Your first stakeholder, your primary stakeholder, is the end customer. So being in that SaaS environment, which is different from being in a client-based environment where you're working for your client, that's definitely one of the things I love about product design and being inside an organization is you are directly there with your customer, and that's your primary stakeholder. And then when we think about internal stakeholders, I think about it more as the strategy, like aligning to the strategy. The strategy should represent the broader business needs and the stakeholder needs. So it's probably different to what you might see in an agency environment. We're starting all together with product design and engineering, and understanding the customer space or the problem space that we're talking about, which means talking to 10 or 15 customers or whatever it is, and mapping out that landscape in that area that we want to work in, and then looking at the revenue objectives and what we're trying to get to. So I think in terms of stakeholders in that environment, you've really got to be looking at your customer and the strategy.
Okay. With that, let's say you speak to your 10 or 15 customers to really try and define the problem area. And let's say you come back and there's 5 common problem areas and you want to solve them all, but then do you align them back to the dollar value per output? How would you systemize or give them a tier or a rating?
Yeah. So I think with your commercial outcomes or your revenue outcomes and that strategy, there's going to be many initiatives that will sit under that. There could be many different teams working towards the same objectives as well. But I think what's really helpful for designers from a designer point of view is to make sure that your design team is understanding just the basic commercial levers within the business to begin with. So we're dealing with a SaaS model, so a subscription-based, a monthly type of subscription. That's your main source of revenue, is the number of customers you've got and the amount they're paying per month. When you're looking at your strategy or an initiative that you're picking up, often it will lean towards acquiring new customers or servicing existing customers. You have this spectrum. You might be trying to serve both of those objectives, but you might also be leaning towards, let's get new customers in this country that we're going into or in this particular job to be done area. Or you might be looking at your existing customers saying, we want to retain them for longer. We want to keep them in our software for longer. We want them using our software more. And the difference between those two commercial outcomes could impact what your design team focuses on. You might be thinking more about onboarding experiences or first-time experiences if you're thinking about acquiring new customers. If you're thinking about your existing customers, you might be thinking more about designing for their efficiency, helping them to become more efficient at their job. So figuring out those things right from the beginning is a really important part of the process.
I'm a user of Xero, so I understand the product very well. And I think it's designed great. Like, it is very, very simple to use, right? Even from an onboarding perspective. Like, if you set up a new company or a new entity in it, it's a couple of clicks. So it's working well. So how do you, I guess, align that with your team to get them, this is where we're going to go, this is how we're going to do it. How do you communicate? All right, let's start here and align them.
Yeah. I guess a lot of people will have heard of a technique called opportunity trees, which is more of a product type of activity. So an opportunity tree starts with something at the top and branches downwards. And the thing at the top, in a way, I think it's Teresa Torres, who's really well known for these opportunity trees. Her version is we start with some sort of business objective at the top and we branch down in towards initiatives and things we want to do. Within that, you might see, from a design perspective, you might see like how might we statements, like how would we solve this type of problem? What I think a better way of doing that is to bring the customer outcome and the business outcome right to the top of that opportunity tree and combine them together and look for the overlaps and then bring that down through the different opportunities. So another part of that's something you would do at the beginning of a kickoff or an initiative is just sort of starting for the first time. Another thing that's really helpful in those types of moments when you're right at the beginning of something is to map out your customer journey. There's all sorts of customer mapping techniques, whether you're looking at service blueprints or just user journeys. You map out all those steps, and along each point in that journey, you are able to define different types of outcomes that you want to achieve. So an example might be, we're getting someone to go through that onboarding process. At this point, our commercial objective might be to get the highest conversion rate we can. We want the most number of people clicking on this button to get through that page. A customer outcome at that same point in the journey might be something like, we want to really make sure that the user understands what is happening on this page and what the benefits of clicking on this button is, for example. So you align those two things. One is really more your strategy team and your product team. It's going to be their natural language to talk about number of users clicking on the button.
Yeah.
For designers, it's going to be closer to their natural language to say, how do we make this easy? How do we get the usability really good? All those types of things. And you just put them all there on the page in your big Miro board or whatever it is that you're using on that point in the journey and make it explicitly clear. You can do that at each point of that journey. You can do it at the beginning of the journey. What's the end goal of the customer here? What's the job they're trying to get done? And the act of making it extremely explicit and having it written there on the page builds in that automatic alignment across the team.
How do you define the metrics to tie all of these initiatives to, from a business perspective and linking the designers back to that?
It's a good question because there are probably hundreds and hundreds of metrics that you could track. And you want to measure what matters most. So you want to have an ideal type of measurement. But then you're also going to have system constraints. There's things that you can measure and can't measure. And some of the challenges we've had at Xero in the past have been about the fact that we handle sensitive data. So we handle tax information, we handle business accounts, all that type of stuff. For a long time, we actually had a problem measuring some of those things because it was sensitive data. We couldn't use Google Analytics, for example, to measure some of those things. So you've got all sorts of challenges like that. So there's finding a good balance between what's the ideal measurement and what's an actual feasible measurement that you can get to. A product point of view, your product team is going to be very strong on what some of those metrics are, the ones that will resonate throughout the business. And that can be things like attach rate or win rate. Those are examples of how many customers are using this, how many customers are getting through this part of the journey. From a more design and experience point of view, there's lots of things you can measure too. One example might be the learnability of something. So you can measure the learnability of how easy something is to figure out. You can measure that with just a time-based metric. How long does it take a customer or a user to get through this task the first time they've ever seen it? And that might take them 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then you can have that same person do that same task multiple times till they get really good at it and they know exactly how to do it, and then measure again. And that measurement is their efficiency measurement. So you've got the first time they do it versus the 20th time they've done it. And there's usually a gap between those two things. So you might have 10 minutes on learnability and 5 minutes on efficiency. And those are metrics you can track over time.
Is this how you educate your designers in terms of the efficiency of what they're doing and the improvements along the way? Using Xero for the first time or setting up a new entity or trying to learn something, it's relatively easy. It's a straightforward process. But if that was a 5-minute process and the design team understand that there's maybe one little bottleneck that they could change and that gets it down to a 3-minute process, is this how you're educating your designers into the importance from a business return on investment of design, I guess, but getting people through that process faster so there's less friction? Is that how you're educating people?
I'd say probably a lot of the design metrics, we're educating the product and engineering teams on the value of those metrics.
Okay.
The value of design has typically been hard to measure, or perhaps we haven't been great at measuring that. And you can think of things like NPS and customer satisfaction and all those types of things. There's top level metrics. Maybe being designers, we pull apart those metrics and don't believe in them ourselves. Sometimes we think they're great. Sometimes we think that they're not. I think measurements, it's more about educating the business on some of those metrics. The reverse is true for the design team. You're trying to educate them on the commercial levers, on the things that the rest of the business cares about, because those aren't things that are taught at design school. The design thinking process tends to avoid strategy and product metrics. It's not part of that process. It's a design process. And it's pretty standard for a lot of designers to not even know or not even think about how you're going to make money from this thing that you're doing.
Which is a pretty important thing, right? Like, to prove your worth to a business, you've got to be proving an outcome. If you're doing your Angus education course and trying to add a module to the design curriculum, is that something that you'd really try and get brought in? Like, some of that education on design and the ROI to a business challenge? Because I guess as designers, you do have to communicate back to the business of why you're doing something and how that's going to improve some efficiency, operational efficiency, user efficiency, to prove your worth. Is there something like, have you got a system that you use or maybe a stat that you think should be measured rather than maybe an NPS or some of the systems that you say that are pretty iffy? Is there something that you would like to measure against?
I guess there's probably a few different things in the question there, but I think what you can do, one thing that does work with designers is to show them the benefit they'll get or the amount of influence they will have in the business if they use the commercial language and understand it themselves. And an example might be that designers will find a whole bunch of opportunities to improve an experience, maybe that aren't on a roadmap at the moment. And they might have a whole bunch of them and they can't choose for themselves which ones are going to gain traction in the business. If they understand that, for example, let's say that we have a particular page in a screen where lots of users are getting stuck and they're reaching out to customer support. What you can say is that is impacting the cost to serve, or the amount that the business spends on that support page, or having someone on email or whatever it is, whatever your interaction model is with the customer providing that support, it comes with a cost. So you can say, if we were to fix this usability problem or this actual issue on the page that customers are experiencing, we are reducing the cost to serve that page. When you understand that that's the commercial lever behind it, suddenly people listen a little bit more. And you can take that to the business and be more influential and ultimately get that through to customers' hands. So the end outcome for a designer is that they get to ship something that actually makes a difference. And they did that because they use their influence in the business. Once you've had a designer go through that experience, it's sort of self-fulfilling. They suddenly see why it's important to understand these things, because it's the language of the business.
Do you find that makes a better designer once they've seen it happen once and they've seen the impact that they can make they start to look for the challenges where they know that by solving this, there's going to be a clear outcome. Change a feature, fix a problem, and it's going to be see the light of day.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it makes a better designer. I'd say it makes a more impactful designer. It makes one who can achieve more for customers. Ultimately, in a SaaS company, you're not really having impact on a customer until you ship something. You've got to ship something and it's got to land in the hands of a customer. You can be a fantastic designer and design the most amazing concepts in a business. You can be really, really good at that. If it never ends up in the hands of a customer, then you haven't really had that much impact.
Agreed. Look, I wanted to ask a question. So I've got a friend and they were talking about they've got this really meaty challenge that they've tried to solve a few times and then just haven't been able to resolve the problem. It's a complex challenge in a complex organization. So they've had to put it on the back burner a few times and then go back and resolve. Have you had to do that or work your team through that? How do you keep, I guess, motivated or like consistent and revisit that problem or a challenge?
Yeah, it's tough. I've had a few experiences of designing some concepts for customer problems that we had discovered through research and pulled together like some really great ideas for how this could be solved. And we took it through to customers again and showed them the value of it. And they were really excited about it. And then trying to bring it back to the teams and get it into a roadmap, it's difficult. And I think those were some of my early experiences at Xero. And I think that was what caused a little bit of a shift for me in mindset to think that in a large organization, the design skills are not just about how well you design for the customer, that customer problem. It's also how you communicate within the business. And it's the things that you do to build alignment across the team. And so as a result of that, I think what you'd often see in a large SaaS company as opposed to a small startup, for example, is more skills in those journey mapping exercises, more skills in facilitation and communication, kind of an emphasis on designing for the internal teams as well as designing for the customer. When you're in a smaller startup, you're working with one or two people often. And, a couple of people together, you can go on the same path together, go on the same journey, and you don't have to spend much of your time or much of your skills designing to have wide impact in the organization. So I think that's been my big learning of being in a large product team like this, is that it's not just about what you do in Figma, it's all the other stuff that you do as well.
Has that been a good challenge or a complicated challenge to face?
I have enjoyed it. The other benefits, I don't want to sound like it's not fun. Being in a large org like this is actually great fun. I heard this analogy once about working in a small business versus a big business. If you imagine you can fly a little plane, one of those tiny little planes that fits a couple of passengers, you take off and anything that happens in the wind, you've got to react to it immediately. You've got to be nimble. You've got to look at the conditions that are immediately in front of you, and you've got to react to what's happening at the time. When you're in a larger organization, it's like being on a big Boeing 747, big jumbo jet. You've got hundreds of passengers on board, and you need to be thinking not minutes in advance, but the whole journey in advance. You've got a whole crew. You've got everybody there involved taking you on that journey. The end result is you just fly so many people from one side of the world to the other. You're getting more people to a different country or whatever it is. I feel that way about working in a big org versus a little org. It can feel like there's so many people involved. There's so much complication in how you communicate with each other. But we're serving millions of customers by doing this work. It's very far-reaching and very impactful. So that's kind of the upside of all that extra effort you have to put into coordinating around all these people.
That's a good analogy. A small plane's great, and maybe it'll be easier to take off and manage to a degree, but you're only taking 4 people as opposed to 400 or whatever. So the return on investment's quite a lot bigger if the team's cohesive and works well together and it moves in the right direction. Probably a good segue to the next question about sort of justifying design decisions in terms of return on investment. Have you got a strategy of how you approach that?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways that we have to do that in a place like Xero. I think one of the, I guess if we're sort of thinking of what might be useful for other people outside of this conversation, like one thing that's really helpful for design leaders to do is to simply understand the cost of engineering, like the engineering cost of something. And what I mean by that is to be able to talk in the annual cost of a pod or a squad or whatever you have at your business. We call them pods, but a pod is a handful of engineers and a PM and a designer. And working with your engineering peers to understand what does it actually cost per month and per year to have that pod running and operating and working on all these things helps you think about the actual cost of some of your design ideas. And if you have this great idea for how you can make a better experience, and you have a little bit of a sense of how long it's going to take an engineering team based on your previous experience, when you start to think through, okay, this could be a 6 to 12 month job, and that's going to cost us this amount as a business. If you think through that logic, it's going to help you see that the return on investment for this particular thing could be really high. You're going to have to show that you're going to get this many extra customers by doing this, or retain these customers for longer, or increase the ARPU or increase the lifetime value of these customers. And then by the time you're thinking through all of that, you start to naturally pick and choose the design experiences that are actually going to be getting you a good return on investment.
How do you put together your formula? It sounds like you become a bit of an estimator in terms of, all right, hypothetically, this developer or these 5 developers cost X, and it's going to take 6 months. And this is like, how do you analyze what your thought the return on investment to the business would be? Let's say it's hypothetically resolving a customer support issue with a page. Like, how much is that going to wage? Because if you like, all right, we're getting 1,000 inquiries to our customer support team per year, that's 5x customer support people resolving these problems. That's X. Like, how are you focusing this from a formatical, well, I don't think formatical is a word, but from a formula perspective?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I get in there and crunch those numbers to agree that it's very accurate. I think more of like back of the envelope, back of the napkin, whatever we say, those types of estimates. And you pick up on the patterns throughout the business, and you just get a general sense. It's kind of about building up your intuition on how things are going to go, so that you can be a better predictor of how things will work. Those actual the number crunching that actually gets done, and it can be the product team or the strategy team or product marketing or whoever it is. Design can actually play a pretty good role in that, especially when you link in any type of research that you're doing. Because if you've uncovered a particular customer problem or a particular customer need, you can design methods for quantifying how many people might experience that problem. There's different ways of looking at the traits, in our case, the traits of a business. There's different ways of understanding how many businesses, for example, have 2 users in their software. As soon as you have 2 users, they've got a whole bunch of new problems that they've got to figure out. How does one user connect to the other? How do they talk to each other? How do they overlap with each other? You can do the research work to quantify that. And then that becomes an input into the real calculation. It's not always obvious to a strategy person outside of your product space the reality of what your customers are going through day to day. Whereas for designers it is, and that's something that can really contribute to those numbers.
Yeah. Going back to the original question, when we're aligning the teams to the business objectives, is there anything that we've missed that you think's like a bit of another critical element to really making sure that they understand why you're choosing certain initiatives over different ones? Because like you've gone through a few different things like metrics, cost, and that sort of stuff, and they're all like so valuable, but it does seem to be heavily weighted towards understanding the business before you make a decision to go try and fight off a problem. And I think it's a great approach.
Yeah, I think that's generally the approach at Xero. And I would probably also add that that's probably where we are in the stage of our growth as a business. Maybe 15 years ago when we were more startup-y, it was probably more of a phase where you could just design and release something without understanding the size of the market, kind of experimenting first with the product and then seeing if there's a market for it. As you start to grow bigger, it's a little more risky to keep doing that, and you need to sort of flip things around and looking at the size of the market that you want to enter before releasing any product. Now, the cost of a pod, if you're going to really invest a year or two and many, many pods in something, that's a pretty high cost. You want to make sure there's a market for that first. But also, back to your original question, when you're starting off an initiative, another thing that I think is really helpful with designers to help them get aligned with product teams If you're focusing on acquiring new customers, you want to bring in more customers. In our case, what I mean by that is our service is accounting and it's all about small businesses. You can do the job without using our product. So you can do that accounting task that you have in a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper or whatever it is. You can do it on some other tool. It's really important to think about what it takes to get someone to switch from their current way of doing something to your way of doing something. So for example, we're building a new feature for new customers who are currently using spreadsheets. What I like to do with that at the start of an initiative is to help everybody understand that you can't just compare the current way of doing something with your new way of doing something and expect that it's even. There's a lot of inertia in a customer doing something the way that they do it now. It's really hard to pull them away from the thing that they're using right now. So if you want them to come to your product to use it, you have to offer something like 5 to 10 times more value than what they're currently getting from the way that they're doing it today. So that's a really good conversation to have right at the beginning of a project when you're talking about customer outcomes and objectives and business outcomes, is to say, what would it take for these people to switch from the way they currently do something to our way of doing it? And how are we going to add way more value, an extreme amount more value than what they're currently getting to bring them away from their existing solution?
If you're still using Excel spreadsheets, I would hope that that's an easy customer to convert, right?
Well, you'd be surprised in different countries around the world. I know we're well known for cloud accounting, cloud software. There's countries throughout the world that we serve that are just adopting the cloud for the first time. They're used to paper and spreadsheets, and that's the way they're comfortable doing things.
It's interesting because I guess coming from first world country like Australia, you don't think of those sorts of things because the internet has been so efficient for so long and the cloud's been around since a while now. So interesting. Yeah. Is that, look, I'd imagine that it comes back to the sales team and the sales strategy of how you convert those customers, but that'd be a fascinating, I guess, sales pitch to try and convert people. But
I think it's not just about the equity between countries or how far developed a country is. One example is in the US, millions of businesses still use paper checks rather than direct bank transfers. So it's still normal to write a check on a piece of paper and send it to someone. And that's a form of an old business practice or an old accounting practice. To us, it seems that way. It's still standard practice in the US. You'd be amazed at how many people still need it.
Really? Well, I don't think we're far off a digital currency. It's a whole nother topic, but I'm sure that would make it a lot easier for accounting because trying to reconcile cash expenditures in a business is not an easy thing.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
But I guess this is probably more of a off-topic question, but Xero, they're only 15 years old. They've gone through huge amounts of scale. I can't imagine you have that much technical debt. So does it make your job a little bit easier because the platform is only so long, or has the evolutions of going from a small business to the scale it is now produced technical debt along that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do deal with technical debt. It's a part of our world as well. It can depend on so many things. We have some of the original parts of Xero, the very early parts that were built. 15 years, a lot has changed in 15 years in the best way, the best practices for how to build something. We have a mix of areas across the product. Some are new, some are old. One of the challenges from a design point of view is how to create a cohesive experience when you're dealing with a customer who's going across a journey that spans something from 10 years ago and then something from today. It's really hard to make consistent experiences across that. So it's definitely there. It's a challenge depending on which team you're in and which part of the product you're on, exactly how you're going to solve for that. We are definitely dealing with that, as I think most companies of our size and tenure would be as well.
The downside of scaling so quick, it evolves a lot faster than you can manage at some points.
And you're always on this journey of figuring out, should we just get this to market as quickly as possible and build it however we need to build it to get there? Or should we slow down and release it much later? It could be 6 months later, but it could be 2 or 3 years later. You never quite know how long you can actually wait before it's too late.
There's a balance between getting research and process right, or let's just get this built and out and ship it, which is our culture, right? Like, just let's get this done. Let's get it out as fast as possible. Whereas
Yes.
sometimes spend a little bit more time over here planning and getting things in order can actually speed up that process to market or the conversion once you get to market.
Absolutely.
But Angus, absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for sort of talking us through how you manage your team and aligning it back to business objectives. It was really good to sort of understand more about how you operate at Xero and a lot more ins and outs. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been very enjoyable.
Now, if anyone's interested in connecting after this, what's the best way? Via LinkedIn?
Yeah, just jump on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to contact me. I do check it now and then.
Amazing. Angus, once again, thank you so much for your time today.
Beautiful. Thank you.